and then we'll get going. So yeah, welcome. My name is Chris Moss. I will be your instructor this semester for the fall semester 2024. You are viewing this video because you clicked on my Zoom link for our initial meeting. So a little bit about the class before I really get into the big detail. Our courses this semester are online distance education courses. These classes, and I've got 4 sections, so you might be one from any one of my 4 sections. So basically, because it's an online class, distance education class, it is run in an asynchronous fashion. What that means is I do not require students to appear and attend some sort of Zoom online lecture. We do not do online lectures this semester in a distance education course. All your material, and I'll go over that in just a little bit, is located in your Canvas course shell. So I'm going to jump there in just a moment and explain how that will all work. So let me go ahead and share my screen. In fact, let me do one other thing here also. I'm going to unshare my screen for just a moment, and then I'm going to turn off my video. The share works better without my video on, so I'm gone. Okay, so here we go. So this is what you see when you log into your Canvas course for this semester. This is section 1102. That may or may not be your section. It really doesn't matter for the purposes of this demonstration and this discussion. So, as I say, when you log into your Canvas course shell, this is the home page where you go and engage in the course material. A couple of things about your home page. On the right-hand side is a list of assignments. And they right now it makes up the first week or so of assignments. You can probably see more if you dig, and I'll show you how to do that in just a moment. So assignments are located on the right. On our left are our navigation tabs. Right now we're on our home page, but we have access, or I should say students have access to a syllabus, our modules, which is where our material lives, announcements, which is where you went to get the Zoom link for this meeting, discussion, grades, and then further links to our support throughout Canvas and the campus community. So for us, our class, home, syllabus, modules, announcements, discussion, and grades. That's where all of our good stuff is. So the first thing I need to do is to go through our syllabus. So I'm going to click on the syllabus. And by the way, if you want to click through with me, you can go ahead and do that also. So clicking on our syllabus, I'll see this screen here. You can see a list of our sections. You'll be in one of those 4 sections. On the right is a calendar that contains links to the dates for various assignments, so you can quickly see what's due. I will point out that that just mirrors what is on your homepage that we just got done looking at. And I am going to go ahead actually and jump all the way to the very bottom of our syllabus right now. At the very, very bottom of our syllabus is our course summary. What I want you to do is I honestly want you to just ignore this course summary. It's a little overwhelming and it's not fundamentally important as you work your way through the material. So it looks really intimidating, but don't let that freak you out. You can ignore that little bit way down there at the bottom. So here is our syllabus, as I've said. We've got a calendar of assignments and things of that nature. We have our list of sections. My name is Chris Moss. I'll be your instructor. A little bit about prerequisites. Hartnell College uses no prerequisites. We do not have any sort of placement exam. We rely on your high school transcripts and or student self-assessment. We do not offer remedial math courses for the most part. The vast majority of our students are placed directly into a transfer level math course. This is a transfer level math course. What that means is that this course mirrors what you would see in any elementary course at any four-year institution, such as CSUMB or UCSC, to pull some local examples. So if this is your first semester, and I know it is for the vast majority of my students, you are being placed directly into a equivalent four-year college course. Contact information. You can reach out with me through Canvas or email. Whenever you reach out through me through Canvas, it appears automatically in my email. So I usually urge students to use Canvas link to get emailed to me. If you reach out to me, you want to make sure that you include your course and section number. Often I'll need to look at your material, and I cannot do that without your name, course, and section number. So you'll want to make sure you include that. Like I say, I've got 4 sections and 160 students. So you want to let me know who you are and where you're from. We have a phone number here right below my name. This is an online course, so I will not be in my office much this semester. My email is the best way to get in touch with me. My office is D268 in case, on occasion, students will need to drop something off or come and pick something up, perhaps. Excuse me. So there is my office number. Email and Canvas correspondences will be answered within 48 hours, with the exception of weekends and holidays. And now I also want to talk about office hours. As I noticed or noted earlier, this is an asynchronous course. I do not lecture. That doesn't mean I'm invisible. I have regular office hours where students can come and have their questions answered and any clarification made. Those office hours are Monday and Wednesday, 4 to 5 p.m., same time as this presentation, by the way, and Tuesday and Thursday from 7 to 8 p.m. Questions may also be placed in the discussion section of your Canvas course shell, and one-to-one appointments may be scheduled via Canvas or email. Now, a little bit about the detail. Our elementary stats is a 4-unit course, and it's taught entirely online, as I noted previously. There are some online attendance requirements. You may be required to respond to questions and posts on discussion boards. You will not need permission to post. However, most of our discussions will have a due date, and students are expected to respond in a timely manner to our discussion prompts. Failure to do so on a regular basis may cause a student to be dropped. These meetings and discussions will be short and provide a time and a place for student and teacher interactions. So what that means, at least as far as getting you going in the course, is that I shall drop you if you have not entered into a meaningful discussion board post or completed an assignment or communicated with the instructor by email, either initiated by the student or in a response to my email within 48 hours of the start date of class. Now, I've got 48 hours in there, but it is technically 72 hours. I really want people to get this done, so I kind of push it a bit. Now, by the way, it's available for the first 72 hours. After the first census, students who regularly and substantially interact with the course in the manner described above, if you do not do that, you may indeed be dropped. What I need to do is make sure I can drop students who have stopped attending in a meaningful fashion. For a face-to-face class, that's really easy to tell because I don't see my students. For an online class, it's much more difficult. So we'll talk about that as this presentation continues. What is important is that we have regular and substantive interactions. And this is a requirement for all Hartnell online courses, not just mine, by the way, but any other online course you might have with a Hartnell instructor. And for my course, our regular and substantive interactions will include the following: weekly announcements, and I'll point out you already have access to your first weekly announcement, threaded discussion forums with appropriate instructor participation, online office hours, which I've already mentioned, online quizzes and exams, which I will review shortly, and occasional face-to-face individual or group meetings, and posted audio and video. And I'll talk about all of this as we go through our presentation. We do have some important dates this semester. The last date to drop this course with a refund is the 6th of September. If you decide that you do not like what you see in here tonight and do not want to be part of our happy little group, you can go ahead and drop the class and get a refund by the 6th of September. The 19th of September is the last day you can drop without a grade of record. In other words, if you drop no later than the 19th, no one will know that you were ever in this course. It does not appear on any transcript anywhere. If you wish to drop after that date, you will receive a grade of W. The last day to drop and receive a grade of W is November 15th. That's quite a ways away. You'll be reminded at the appropriate time. Our course will end officially the 14th of December, and students will no longer be able to post after that time. A little bit about assessments. Quizzes and homework collections will be announced 2 or 3 days in advance of dates. In fact, they are truly announced much, much further in advance, and you'll see that momentarily. The same thing goes for our quizzes and exams. We have a final exam date online. It is the 12th of December. Now, our fall schedule, it runs from the 26th of August, that is today, through December 14th. And the time commitment is truly substantial. Students are expected to spend between 15 and 20 hours per week this fall semester. And you will need to balance your work, your family, and other obligations that you have with your statistics course. If you do not do that, it will be a very challenging time. And students are really urged to clear their calendars for the balance of the semester, at least as far as you are able. I cannot overemphasize the fact that the 15 to 20 hours is kind of a floor, and many students will need more than 15 hours, maybe more than 20 hours. Topics. For the most part, I will let students read through the topics. These are the things that we are going to spend our time learning this semester. They focus on things like measures, central tendency, position, using our calculators for graphic presentations. We'll talk about sampling distribution, correlation and regression, a lot of discussion on probability and, and the notion of what we call statistical inference. There are a fair number of different types of tests and analysis that we engage in this semester. And our course is really geared for students in business, social sciences, biological sciences, education, and humanities. And indeed, even students in our STEM sequence of courses will find a need for elementary statistics. It is truly a global class. Everyone needs it. And that's something I truly believe. And it was something that was made even more real for me during and after the pandemic, when statistical analysis was front and center and honestly horribly butchered on our national media. Now, we also require use of some kind of technology. This is an important component of this course. And this course is not like an algebra course. We do not do a lot of symbol manipulation. Most every problem we engage in this semester is a word problem of some sort. So it's quite a bit different than your algebra courses that you may have encountered in the past. If you've had some calculus, and I know some of you already have, that will actually be quite useful. Although I must stress there is no calculus prerequisite requirement. But that particular approach will help you understand what's going on much better, I think. I also will really urge students to discuss their transfer requirements with your academic counselor. This, for many of my students, is the last math class you will take during your four-year education at one of our institutions, whether it's Hartnell and then UCSC or CSUMB or somewhere else. This is very likely your last math class. Now, let's talk about supplies. Students will really need two spiral notebooks, one for notes they might wish to make, and one for problem solving and homework assignments. And I'll get to the need for that in just a moment. And I say two because it's just a little easier to organize things. By the way, that could be a 3-ring binder as well as a spiral notebook. You'll need a way to organize lots of information. You will also need a TI-84 calculator. This is required. No other brand and no other model will do. You must procure a TI-84 calculator. I'll talk about how we'll take care of that in just a moment. Our text is called Mostly Harmless Statistics by Rachel Webb. It is the second edition. It is free and available online. So there is no need to purchase a text. And I'll get to that text in just a moment. But for now, realize that you have a link to that text right here. Do not purchase any homework access codes for homework software. Some instructors like that. I don't. That's just more money out of your pocket. So let's keep things as cheap as we can. Or I should say as low cost as we can. Not cheap, just low cost. And I will also note that your assignments will come from your Canvas course shell. So having a sufficiently robust internet connection is really a requirement, not just for interacting with the material, but also for your Zoom meetings that you wish to attend. Your smartphone, by the way, is really not adequate to the task. You really, truly need a full-fledged computer to access this material appropriately. I know that the Hartnell has various internet hotspots on our campuses. If you cannot access the internet from where you are at a reasonable level of interaction, so you may need to be doing that. Now, let's talk a little bit about the TI-84. It is required, and it is not an optional purchase. However, I will note that the reason we do this is because your calculator has, the TI-84 calculator has dedicated statistical tools that mirror the tools found in any expensive software. As I noted earlier, statistics is different than any sort of algebra class that you have taken. We really need technology to do even basic work. The odd thing is, the math, for the most part, is just to add, subtract, multiply, divide, and take the odd square root. However, the process of doing that with multiple values is quite tedious. Not hard in any single case, but tedious in the aggregate. So you'll need a TI-84. We have a TI-84 checkout form. Hartnell has a very robust TI-84 loan program. We have a link right here, and I also sent the link out in your announcements, and I'll take a look at that in a moment. There are a limited number available, so I really urge you to procure that TI-84 calculator ASAP. You will not need it until about week 3 or so. Until then, a regular calculator works just fine. But starting in chapter 3, we spend a lot of time focusing on keystrokes that are needed to carry out the various analysis that we will need to be doing. So, getting a hold of one of those calculators soon is really important. We have a lot of students this semester. I mean a lot. So there's a good chance we're going to run out. The biggest downside is that you must actually go to the library on the main campus to pick up your calculator. We're working on distributing calculators to the various sub-campuses, but that is a work in progress. Now, let me talk about grading. My grading system is very, very simple. We take the number of points you've earned and put that in a numerator. We take the number of possible points and we put that downstairs in the denominator. And this will give you a fraction somewhere between 0 and 1. 1 means 100% or an A. 0 means no percent and obviously an F. And you actually can get more than 100%. We have a fair amount of extra credit available this semester. Where do those points come from? There are 3 exams at 100 points each. There are no makeup exams, but we drop the lowest of those exam scores. There are 11 quizzes at 10 points each. There are no makeup quizzes, but again, we drop the lowest of these quizzes. I'll collect chapter homework and a chapter problem set 11 times. These are going to be worth 5 points, and I drop the lowest 2 scores. There are 12 chapter review assignments, and again, 5 points, and we'll drop the lowest of those 2. Should say 5 points somewhere in there. Bad, Chris. We have 4 exam review assignments before our major exams. That includes the 3 exams I've already mentioned, plus a final. Drop the lowest of those also. And we have additional material worth 5 to 10 points each, and attendance may be required to gather up that credit. Our final exam is worth 200 points, and this is not one of the exams to be dropped. So there's approximately 640 points available this semester. At the end of the semester, a number around 640 is going to go into that denominator. Your goal this semester is to get as close to 640 points in your numerator as you can. 0.90 to 1.0, that is your A. 90% to 100%, basically. 80 to 89 is the B. 70 to 79, C. 60 to 69 is your D. Anything south of 60 or 60% is an F. The goal here is to earn a grade of C or better. That is the only way this class will transfer. Having a grade of D does mean you pass the class, but it also means you'll have to take the class again. Student learning outcomes. At the end of the semester, our students will be able to do the following. And this is a very general notion of what you'll have as a skill set when you are done this semester. You'll be able to analyze a data set using appropriate technology to calculate and interpret summary statistics. Students will evaluate and assess a data set in context to identify the appropriate inferential procedure for constructing an estimate or making a decision about a population parameter. Students will analyze a sample space to determine probabilities and identify unusual events. Students will apply the concept of sampling distributions in the context of the central limit theorem to calculate probabilities. Those are four very broad skills. Taken together, they really bracket what we're trying to convey this semester. I also realize that that list is full of a bunch of words that right now are a little bit confusing. That is the way of things here on the first day of the semester. We'll work through all of those as we go through our semester. And they're broad outcomes. And all of this material is embedded in your course work. It's not called out separately. There's no exit exam covering this material. It is embedded within your course work. We do have student support. Primarily is our DSPNS office, our Department of Supportive Programs and Services that works with students with documented disabilities. If you are a student with a documented disability, you will reach out to the DSPS office and I will receive an accommodation form from you, DSPS office. If you are not a student with a documented disability, you won't receive any of those accommodations, although you may feel you'll need those accommodations as we go along. As we work through the semester, if I notice in your coursework a real struggle, I may actually reach out to you individually and privately and suggest as gently as possible you might wish to engage with DSPNS. We also have a student learning center, and I will point that out in just a moment. And we have a MESA program and a math lab. Now, the math lab is actually part of the learning center. The MESA program is for students in the STEM area who wish to gather up additional resources and support. I have a link to the Panther Learning Lab, and I'll show you that link, but not from this screen. This is where we have our online support. It is available on a drop-in face-to-face basis. It is also available online. So students can work through material in that fashion and gather up tutoring in that way. That is in addition to any help or tutoring you might get from me during office hours. I do expect you to monitor your Canvas account for assignments and grades. A very nice thing about your Canvas course shell is the ability it gives you to monitor your grades. Some of you students have already turned in a fair amount of work. You took advantage of the ability to browse the course the day before we actually start, and now you're ahead of the game. Well done. I've also been able to grade some of that work already. So, staying in contact with your Canvas course shell is a real benefit and really does help students. Now, a little bit about our assessments. I do not schedule makeup quizzes or exams. As I noted before, there's a number of things that do get dropped. And I collect homework via the uploading of images. And I'll go through this process in just a moment. I collect it at the end of every chapter, and I will not accept late assignments. And as I noted above, some activities may require you to actively participate to receive credit. And once again, you've actually got to be there and in the moment to get the available credit. The final exam will not be ready early. I work on that thing until the very last day I can to make sure it's exactly the way I want it. So it will not be available early, and you must take it to receive a passing grade. I say a few things about online etiquette. I think most obvious things are the notion that when we do post, there is the prerequisite that we are polite and respectful of everyone online. And that's really the nice way to build up a community. And again, I ask you to view your material in a very timely fashion. I'll be going through that in just a moment. Canvas is what we use. It's like, duh, it's the only thing we've been looking at for the last half an hour. So there we go. Now, a little bit about your student experience. We present this course in an online format, and I'll deliver this via the assistance of a PowerPoint presentation and other materials. And actually, it's really not so much PowerPoint anymore, as you'll see. It's a little bit more accessible and easily accessed than PowerPoint. I expect you to use your time to note items from the presentations as necessary. You can go ahead and print these things out and keep them with you. Every report will appear embedded in a presentation of some sort, and I expect you to stay current with our excuse me, with our assigned topic. Lecture notes are available in Canvas under your modules link, and you'll see those in just a moment. As I noted, this is a transfer level course, and it is quite different from courses you've had. The rigor is the equivalent of anything you would find in any four-year school, and students who fall behind early will be very hard-pressed to make up that material. Looks like I dropped a sentence there. Online learning can be very challenging. You have to be a self-starter. Success or the lack thereof is going to depend on your ability to find focus and discipline. I really will stress the focus and the discipline. You're not going to be required to show up at a regular time every day or every week. You'll have to find it within yourself to access the material and, as I note, be the self-starter you will need to be. Attention while engaging in online learning is a prerequisite for this success, and distraction really must be minimized to successfully complete this course of study. And I cannot overemphasize this. We give you much more responsibility. This is a transfer level course. Four-year schools provide a lot less hand-holding than maybe you've had in the past. So you, again, will need to be responsible for engaging in our material, and consistent attendance and interaction with your course material is expected. The time commitment is substantial. I noted that up above. In addition to all the material you or time you spend engaged with the online material, you'll have homework to do. And as I note, an inability to budget time accordingly will greatly reduce the likelihood of successfully completing this course of study. We have an emergency statement. I'll let you read that as your leisure, excuse me. And I will note that I needed to change this. It's the one thing I didn't change. Gosh, darn it. Your transcript will be available not by the 10th of August, that's long past. It'll be available by about the 4th or so of January. I'll get in and change that at some point over the next week.
Recording in progress. Recording in progress.
So, someone's got their mic on. Perhaps they can mute their mic. That would be appreciated. Thank you. Okay, so. Ooh, they've got some bad feedback happening. Here, hold on. Let me see if I can figure out who it is. Someone, who do I hear? All right, so be it. Let me go back to my share. There we go. Okay, so as I said, we've gone through now our syllabus. Let's take a look at where your material actually lives. It lives over here on the left-hand side of your screen. And let's take a look under modules, because this is where you will find your material. Now, I organize my material in a very, very linear fashion. There's not a lot of jumping around, although it's possible to do that. Part 0 is our introduction to Canvas. I have an instruction set, introductory, and it contains a list of the tasks you will need to complete for this first set of assignments. You want to read the material in the syllabus. We just got done doing that. You want to read and complete the Chapter 0 Introduction to Your Canvas Course Shell assignment. You'll want to read the challenges of online learning, and you'll want to complete Chapter 0 Introduction to Your Canvas course for the spring of, it should say fall of 2024. Again, I'll change that a little bit later this semester. So you'll want to complete all of the exercises, and you will upload an image of your choosing as noted in the Chapter 0 Introduction to Canvas Course Shell assignments, and our assignment is listed right here. Now, I can jump back to modules and start to work through my list. So next up is the challenges of online learning. Or I can use my next button down here at the bottom. Remember, I said this is very linear. So we'll have the challenges of online learning, and I will let you read through that on your own. It's part of our assignment, but it touches on many of the things I've already mentioned. As I say, I prefer to use modules as a way to manipulate and scroll through my material. Here is our first assignment. You'll know notice the funky picture with the page and what looks like, I guess, a pencil. It's worth 5 points. It is due August 29th. So let me take a look at our first assignment. This is Chapter 0, Introduction to Canvas. Our task is to read the syllabus, to read the challenges of online learning, and review this video below. It's from a previous semester, but it goes over what we're going over right now. And now it asks you to submit an image of your choosing. And we will follow the prompts in the video up here, but I'm going to demonstrate it directly. Up here at the top, it's got a button that says Start Assignments. I will need to click on that button, and I will upload a picture. Now, I will accept pictures in a number of different formats. So ideally, what students will do is they will use their phone to take an image of their homework. They will choose the image that corresponds to the image of their homework. They'll select on that image. They will open that up, and it will go in as an uploaded file. We can add a second file, and there we go. Now, once we've had files loaded in, I can submit the assignment. Those will be images of your homework. But once you've submitted the assignment, if you've done things correctly, you'll see the little bit of confetti. That means you've done things appropriately. Next up is our quiz 0. You'll notice we've got a little rocket ship that is filled in. That means this is a quiz that will apply to your grade. It's worth 16 points, and it's due the 29th. Now, actually, let me jump back up here to the assignment for just a moment. I forgot to point something out there. If we go down up to the top, you'll note that the assignment is available from the 25th through August 30th. It is due the 29th, but you can submit the assignment up to 1 day late. It will not be discounted in any fashion. It's a little bit of a fudge factor to help students who may forget to turn something in and wake up the next morning and realize they still need to submit their assignment. So you can submit your assignments up to 1 day late, and it will not have a negative impact on your grade. The same also holds for all of our quizzes and exams. This exam is due the 29th. It is available from the 25th, that's yesterday, through the 30th at close to midnight. So even though it's due the 29th, you'll be able to take and submit it through the 30th without any impact on your grade. We have a list of instructions. The material in this quiz covers your syllabus. You'll have 30 minutes. The quiz is open book and open notes. I really want to stress this. All of our quizzes and exams this semester are open book and open note. I really urge students to print material and have that available for perusal prior to any quiz or exam. You won't be able to access the material from within your quiz or exam, but if you have it printed out next to you, you can certainly use that. That's why I'll urge you to print out a copy of the syllabus. You must work alone, and for our first and only our first, our quiz 0, you will have multiple attempts. So we will take the quiz, or I will take the quiz and show you how this works. You will scroll through your questions one at a time. All of our quizzes are online. Most of the questions are multiple choice. Our course requires this calculator as the very first question. There's the TI-84. I can borrow a calculator from the library. None of these. No calculator is required. No. Well, have you been good this year? Yes, until supplies run out is the correct answer there. How do I do that? We'll fill out the form via the link in the syllabus. Now I shall go ahead and move on to the next question, and I'll work my way through the quiz in that fashion. I can go back to previous questions. When I have finished the work, the entire quiz, or as much as I wish to complete or can complete, I submit the quiz. Canvas will tell me that in this case, I've got some unanswered questions, and I'm not surprised. This is just an example with a test student. I'll say, okay. All right. So we come back here. I can take the quiz again because we've got multiple attempts. And I've scored 3 out of 16. And again, I can take that quiz if I wish to improve my score. I will note over here in grades, I have one grade to view, and it is the quiz 0 initial quiz. I also can see that I've turned in my homework, but it hasn't been graded by the instructor yet. So as I say, grades is a very important place for you this semester. Finally, is our initial online check-in. It's available here. It is also available under discussions. And that initial online discussion is available until August 28th at 11:59 p.m. It is a required discussion, and I need to post a reply. I need to provide my name. I need to provide the section I am enrolled in, and I need to provide a favorite sport to watch. You can see that students have already responded. Students who do not respond by late PM on Tuesday, it's actually Thursday, and I'll go in and I'll change this. This is still incorrect. That needs to be adjusted. But you'll have to do that by, as I say, what was it, the 29th, before that happens. Once you do that, you'll be enrolled in the class and I will not drop you. Let me reply to that. My name, is test student. I am enrolled in, this is 1102. Your section number will be different or may be different. My favorite sport to watch, baseball. Go Giants. Then I'll post my reply. And there we go. I will go in and note who has posted replies. I'll do that after the last date to reply. And we'll go on from there. Students who have not will be dropped. Students that have, you'll stay enrolled in the class. So there is our initial check-in and how we scroll through our material. And again, I tend to use the module screen as opposed to the next button, just because I like the global picture. I like to know where I am in the course of things. All right, we got about 10 minutes left, so let me run through our course material. We have a chapter 1 instruction set. So you will read the material in chapter 1, and here is a link to our text. I'll show you that link in a moment. You'll want to read the material in our lecture summary and technical detail page. We have a chapter 1 homework problem set, a chapter 1 practice vocabulary quiz, a chapter 1 review, and a quiz 1 chapter 1. Now, as I say, I love linearity, and every chapter is organized just like this one. I do not change the ordering of events or things. So I'll have you complete all the exercises in the chapter 1 problem set. You're going to take an image of your completed work or scan and save it as a PDF. That is certainly possible. Many of my students work on computers. Save it as a PDF. You can upload that. Then you'll upload those images of your good work, as you saw me do with the picture just a little bit ago. And I will note that you can attach multiple images in a single submission. You want to complete the review and complete the vocabulary quiz. So that is the overall view of the chapter 1 material. Now, let's take a look at the chapter 1 lecture summary and technical detail. This material contains, and I really want to stress this, everything of import that is in your online text, as well as worked examples, videos, and supporting material. So students can access pretty much everything they'll need this semester by taking a look at the lecture summary and technical detail page for each chapter. I contain definitions, material with worked examples. And again, definitions, notation, and the like. Now, vocabulary is really the big elephant in the room with statistics. This is a very vocabulary intensive course, much more so than any other math class you've looked at previously. Chapter 1 is all vocabulary, and we'll need most of these words as we go through our material this semester. So this is the material I say that you should pull and have printed out. If you want to print this material out, Control-P says print, and what you will do is under destination, you will have save as a PDF, and you can then save to your local drive or the cloud and print that PDF out. You can save and then go back and print that material out, staple it up together, note items of import, and bring that to your quiz or exam. So you can do this as you work through your material. So that is the summary and technical detail. Chapter 1 problem set contains our list of problems. Now, our problems this semester will come from two different areas. And this is true for every assignment. Our text-based exercises are the assignments out of our mostly harmless statistics and available through our online text. And you've got links up above to that online text. And again, I'll visit that text in a moment. So you will have to complete these problems. Answers to odd problems are available in the back of that text. And in addition to the text-based exercises, we also have online problems that must also be answered. And again, notice that there are a lot of questions here. It's because the vocabulary is just so awesome during the chapter 1 material. It's not like this for all chapters, but it is for chapter 1. Now, many of you have been told religiously, had it beaten into your heads to write the problem down first, then solve the problem. I will urge you not to do that this semester. Print out the problem set, have it next to you, but just give yourself the answers on your written assignment. It takes way too long to write some of these problems down. They're paragraph length, honestly, some of them. So you'll need to take note of that. Once you have written those down, you will submit them as images. And I will note that there is a Chapter 1, Quiz 1 available online. It's not available until the 2nd. And I will note that it is available from the 2nd to the 3rd. It says that it is due on the 2nd, and that is true, but you can submit the quiz up to 1 day late with no sanction against your points. So that quiz will be available. You'll complete the quiz. You'll be able to see the results online pretty quickly. I will have to go in and grade your homework assignments and your review assignments. The last little thing I want to click on here is the vocabulary review. This is a quiz, but it is a practice quiz. It is not required, but it is there to have available. Oh, look at that list of vocabulary items. Now, this quiz is, as I say, a practice quiz, and it is available from the 25th. I have it due as the 1st of September, but that is really when you really should have completed it. Remember, it's practice, and it's not a part of your grading, but it is a part of your resources. So it's available until almost the end of your semester. So you can jump in and review the vocabulary as you see fit at any point up until 11:59 p.m. on December 11th. So it's big, it's long, it's intimidating, but it is a practice quiz and it is a resource available throughout the entire semester. You'll notice that Chapter 2 follows the same general outline as does Chapter 3. Let me jump up here to the Chapter 3 lecture summary and technical detail. And again, this is something you will want to print out and bring to your quiz. But I will note that you have available all your formulas. And by the way, most of them are built directly into your calculator. So you will start to find embedded videos. If you click on the video, whoa, there I am talking math nonsense. And I go through all of the details and working through your TI calculator. Let's turn me off. And you can come back to that as often as you wish. There are several of these covering all the major keystrokes that we'll need for the Chapter 3 material. There are PowerPoint lectures. I urge you to download and look at them via PowerPoint, but they really represent an archive of sorts, as I do not really use them anymore. The material is available in the lecture summary and technical detail. You have a review assignment, very much like you do for every chapter. You have a problem set here, and you will note that every chapter review contains solutions, not how to get to those solutions, but the solutions themselves. That is part of the plan. That's not a mistake. Check your work. Your chapter reviews give you a very, very, very good look at the type of questions that appear on your online quiz and your online exams. So your exam 1 has a review. It's available and due the 19th. You can turn it into turn it in up to 1 day late. Wow. There's our very first exam. It's not available until the 20th of September, and it is due the 20th of September. But again, you can take it up to 1 day late. And again, this is in all assignments and quizzes and exams this semester, every last one of them. So you can take it to that point there and up to 1 day late. So there we go. That is your first module. Your other modules are similarly organized. There's no difference in how that goes down. There's no difference in what you will see for each chapter. Again, I'm super linear and super consistent. So I think your module screen is how you work through this. I think your grades screen is how you look at your grades. Your announcements. These are the first set of announcements. This is where you found the link to this meeting. We have a week 1 update, and you'll get an update every week. It appears for a week, and then it disappears from your screen. But this is what we've got going on this week. So you'll be able to tell on Sunday exactly what is up and in front of us for the balance of the week. I'm going to be going a minute or two over. I understand if people have other things to do. And we also have a link to your calculator request form. Let me know if this link works. If you have any trouble with the links, and there's been some issue with the link to the calculator loan form, if you click on that link, let me ask you, is this what you see? Can you see the calculator request form on your end? If someone would unmute and say, yes, I can see it, or no, I can't, I'd like that.
Yes, I can see it.
Oh, good. I'm so happy. I didn't think that was the case. Sometimes it's a little funky sometimes.
Yeah, I did it yesterday too.
Oh, good. Okay, good.
I can see it.
You can. Good. I'm glad.
But I went to the library this morning just to check it out.
Yeah.
But they told me that usually it's gonna take like around 24 hours to actually see it then.
Yeah, it probably will. But here's the important thing. If you turned in that form, you're already in the queue, and nobody else who turns in after that you can jump forward. And again, we need it in chapter 3. We won't need it until then. So I don't think the 24-hour thing will be a big issue. So let me stop my sharing for just a moment. And then come back now to this page here. And oh dear, that's not what I want. Hold on. Okay, so let me do this again. There we go. All right, so it's just a little bit fussy sometimes. I apologize, that's on my end. So you have your calculator loan request form. I also wanted to click on the link for your text. So this is your text, mostly harmless statistics. There is a table of contents, and it's helpful if you're going to be submitting questions for me to answer. Sometimes students actually get right in here and cut and paste entire questions and put them into either the chat or email or what have you. So there is your text. What else? Oh, let me jump over to discussions. I know is there a little bit ago, I want to come back. So there's our initial online discussion. We've talked about that. That's the one that's got to be done by Wednesday, 8 p.m. Also, we have our homework questions and answers discussion. And this is where students can post questions by placing them here. So and I can go ahead and take a look at those, and you can cut and paste and whatnot. And I can come in and look and see where people have been having trouble. I can post solutions. The other option that people have is to use the office hours for this class. Now, let me go ahead and stop my share. And let me actually go ahead and get out of my student view and go back to my view of things. You will find as things become available under announcements, you will find links to various things that you will need to do. So the first three things that you see are the first three things that I see here. But then you're going to have links to office hours on a daily basis when those office hours are held. So you'll get a link on Wednesday for the office hour that goes from 4 to 5 p.m. on Wednesday. On Thursday, you'll have an announcement with a link to the Thursday office hour from 7 to 8 p.m. And that'll occur throughout the semester. So you'll be able to see your link to your homework assignments, your link to your office hours on a daily basis. So it should be pretty easy to access that. You can also place questions in your discussion, and that really pretty much covers what I wanted to go through today in terms of our syllabus and our course outline. Let's see, we've got some stuff in chat down here. Let's take a look at that. Yeah, they can see it. Yeah, I just have a hard problem seeing the online chat when I'm sharing my screen. I can, it's just difficult. So thank you for unmuting and shouting that out. I do appreciate it. So as I say, you will find links to office hours in your announcement section on a regular basis. And I will note that I do the same presentation tomorrow night. But if you were here tonight, please don't think you've got to show up again tomorrow. It's just a repeat of what we're doing right here. So I will, when this becomes available in Zoom, it takes a little while. I will upload it to Canvas. You'll see that as a dedicated page in that chapter 0. And you'll be able to access this recording if you forget where things are or wonder how to do things. But again, I got to tell you, once again, boom, 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 linear from first to second to third, A to B to C to D, all semester long. The organization for every chapter is the same. So hopefully that will help you manipulate and make your way through all this material. I will say goodbye, and I will really thank you all for attending. This is the way to get started in the right way for your semester. Don't hesitate to reach out to me with questions and concerns. And if you're not here tomorrow night, and honestly, there's no reason for you to be, hopefully I'll see you on Wednesday or Thursday if you have homework questions, or I'll run into you in the discussion forums also. So having said that, bye-bye. Be well. Yeah, everyone's leaving. Good. Good. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.